Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Old Dad Jazz Podcast. I'm your host, Matyash, and today I have with me Karen Geldart. And she's a Theta Healer practitioner. We're going to talk about also hypnosis, timeline therapy, predetermination versus free will, prior agreements. This is agreements before the lifetime, altering those agreements via Theta Healing, her understanding of karma, learning lessons on Earth, and I still can't pronounce it, Ho'oponopono, which is a Hawaiian healing technique for reconciliation and forgiveness, etc. Very exciting podcast, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the new episode of All That Jazz. I'm your host, Matyash, and today I have with me Karen Geldart. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This is take 2. We're gonna succeed this time. So, I wanted to ask about, I wanted to introduce the audience how I met first Karen. We went to, it was at, I think University of Toronto had a hypnosis workshop, and the second workshop that I took with Georgina Cannon, I think that's where I met you, Karen. And then the third one was, I don't know if you were there. No, you were not there in the past life regression. Sorry, no, you were there in the second one, right? Because it was a big class. I remember that. And then after the class, we did some things, some Theta Healing stuff, and the first night it kind of freaked me out. And then Deborah at home, she, which was a lady that rented the house to me, she's like, oh, it doesn't sound too bad. And so the next day we did some more work. So that was my short introduction, very intense, to Karen's work. And it was very interesting. And because you were also doing the muscle testing, I remember you were doing the muscle testing like as the whole body, like falling forward and falling backwards as well, right?
Yeah, there are different ways that you can do muscle testing, or some people call it applied kinesiology. Yeah, so there's different ways, and different techniques may work better for some people than others.
Right. And that day you also did something that freaked me out, which is you tested as my energy. And I remember feeling like a tingling sensation, and that's what freaked me out that day. But it's all good now.
That's good.
Okay, so let's go to the beginning. So did you start with spiritual stuff early in life, or was it something you started on later?
For me, it was definitely later. I was but I was into my 40s for sure. At the time, it was probably back in 2012, and I've always been a seeker. You know, books were always really important to me. Reading was important, learning new things. And back in 2012, found myself in a place where I was working in a real estate company, writing a lot of real estate contracts, and I kept thinking that really wasn't where I was supposed to be, when I wasn't what I was supposed to be doing in life, because if I wanted to do that, I would have gone to law school. And I actually had completed a master's degree in counseling some years before, ended up working in higher education in universities, doing more student services and support work, not necessarily one-on-one counseling. But back in 2012, as I said, I was kind of looking for a new path, looking for a new direction in life. And a friend of mine, a good friend, introduced me to numerology. She was someone who every year would get her numerology chart done. And, you know, it was really something that she put a lot of stock in, and convinced me that it would be a great Christmas gift for myself to purchase my numerology chart, which I did in 2012. And that really opened a lot of doors to me to basically a whole new world, a whole new dimension of thought that I really hadn't come across before. I wasn't someone who, I was someone who grew up in the Catholic Church and kind of, had various levels of participation on and off throughout my life, and wasn't someone who really believed in past lives or knew a lot about spirituality other than what I associated with the faith that I had been brought up in. So this was kind of a whole new world to me, and it was very interesting. It made a lot of sense, the reading or the chart that I got back in terms of talking about my life path. I have a life path number 9, which is the humanitarian or the healer, someone who wants to help others, and that really did resonate with me because that is something that I've been interested in throughout my life, is doing some meaningful work with people in terms of helping them. And so that was, but it was interesting because in the CD-ROM that I got with all of the information on it, the woman who did my chart talked a lot about, that in numerology, there's a belief that we choose before we come into this world. We choose the day, the month, the year of our birth. We choose our parents, and we choose all of these things because the resonance or vibration in terms of numerology is what we think as souls will be beneficial to us in this lifetime in terms of learning the lessons that we want to learn. And so it was a pretty big eye-opener for me at the time. And just after that, I started studying pretty intensely some different modalities, hypnosis, timeline therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, and also Theta Healing, which you mentioned earlier.
Yes, we did. Karen also worked with me for quite a long time, and I found it really beneficial when we did work. And timeline therapy, I do remember because it was something we, especially early on, it was going to it's basically going to the source of the problem. Is that right? Going where it originated.
Yeah, so timeline therapy, it's sort of a semi-hypnotic technique where it's all about working with the unconscious mind. So, a lot of actually all of the work that I do, the various modalities, it's all about working with the unconscious mind. Some people call it the subconscious mind, to get at different negative emotions that we might be holding on to that might be impeding our progress, or also, very importantly, any limiting beliefs that we might have about ourselves or the world around us that really, if you believe, and I do, that we create our own reality, our reality is created through the information that we hold in our unconscious mind. So if we want to, if we're not getting the results that we want to be achieving in life, it's highly likely that there's some kind of unconscious belief or program that we're running in the background that is affecting how we view the world and how we interact with the world. So timeline therapy works with the person's unconscious mind to help identify a root cause of either a belief that they're holding on to or a negative emotion they're holding on to. So if you take the example of a negative emotion, like anger, if someone is feeling like they're having a hard time, their anger is present in their life a lot of the time, and maybe they're easily triggered and they're really not sure what all of that is about. In timeline therapy, we would say that the person is holding on to unresolved feelings of anger from the past, because the unconscious mind, when something happens in our life, and a lot of these things are picked up between the age of 0 and 7 years old, if you can imagine maybe a little sort of like a metaphysical backpack that you have on from the moment you're born. Sure. And if something happens in your life, and say that the backpack is labeled anger, so you might be 6 months old and you're hungry and no one's coming to feed you, and so that your little body gets upset or angry. So if you think about putting a few rocks in there that would represent anger, maybe a year later something else happens and it's pretty major, so you put a bigger rock in there, or maybe it's not as big, so there's a handful of sand. And because the unconscious mind is always trying to learn and its major role is to protect us from harm and to keep us safe. It wants us to learn from the experiences that we encounter in life and try to mitigate those in the future, or mitigate the the negative consequences. So it will hang on to learnings from those events, but it can sometimes also hang on to the negative emotions from the events because it feels like that might be helpful in the learning. But old emotion really is just old energy, right? It doesn't really serve us in the present. So with timeline therapy, the idea is to empty all those rocks out of the backpack so that you're feeling a lot lighter, because we don't just carry around one backpack. We have all kinds of negative emotions that we could carry around with us that really energetically can weigh us down if we're carrying around old emotions.
Right. And there's also from a previous lifetime, maybe baggage. It's not just this lifetime, right?
Yeah. Yep. So timeline therapy works with the client to help them identify the root cause. So, where did this originate? And it leads the person through a series of questions, and they don't make sense on a conscious level, but they're designed to get a response from the unconscious mind. So, you would ask the person, so what's the root cause of this event? The meaning of which, if we could pull it, would cause this problem to disappear. And so you would ask the client, was it before, during, or after your birth? And you don't want them thinking consciously about it. You just want the first thing that pops into their mind. So it could be, it could be in the womb. It could be from a past life. It could be something in this lifetime.
And also it could be, like you mentioned before, it could be something that we agreed to before the lifetime. Like Winston Churchill famously said in a book, I think it was his first biography, he said, and it still puzzles me, he said that he thought that free will and predetermination are the same thing. And let's say in his case, maybe it was, maybe he decided before the lifetime that he's gonna become a prime minister. So everything that he was doing in his life was just preparing him for that moment, for the Second World War, where he was, charging the battle against the Nazis and defending England. So it could be that, could not be just a belief system, but could be a decision that you don't even recall from before the lifetime.
Yeah, that is very, very true, or very possible. I always tell people I don't know for sure. These are things that I might believe based on what I've seen in my personal experience, or things that I've read, or things I've heard from other people. Between lives, there are some people who believe that we plan our next lifetime, and we might make agreements, soul contract or soul agreements, with other individuals, often from our soul family. We make agreements with these people to help them learn things. We ask them to help us learn certain things, and we can definitely chart a course for our life before we arrive. I do think so. I can see where he's coming from with that quote, and it kind of makes a lot of sense to me. But I also think that sometimes when we arrive in this lifetime, things may not be turning out exactly as we thought they would, but when we planned them before we came. And so in terms of whether or not we have free will, we always have free will. And even if we did make agreements on a soul level, or agreements we're not consciously aware of, if we become conscious of them, then it's my belief that we can alter those agreements in a way that it works out for the highest good, or for our highest good, for sure. Because we might make decisions from a certain level of awareness or understanding, but when we arrive in this classroom, if you want to call it that, on Earth, things could be a little different. We could run into other situations that we didn't anticipate. I don't believe that, it's like there's an 80-year, there's a movie that spans our 80 years, or however long we intend to be here, where every minute of every day is scripted. There will be general themes or things that we want to learn, and different players that we tap to help us learn those things. But yeah, that's kind of the way that I see things. I do also think that we've been here many times before, a lot of us, And so we've had a lot of opportunities to learn these lessons, oh, more than once probably. So I do think there is a point at which we can evolve and progress to the point where we don't have that need to keep returning or coming back.
Right. Well, why do you think there is that human beings or the soul of us is so slow in learning that we need constantly fail over and over again before we learn a certain lesson? What's the purpose of that?
Well, I really wish I knew. And I think part of it is a program that a lot of us are running around suffering, and a belief that that there is suffering through learning through suffering, and that somehow overcoming suffering, I don't know, it might be a mark of spiritual progress, but I don't really believe that is the truth or the divine truth. I kind of feel like,
Right. So
just because we're in between lives doesn't mean we have all of the knowledge of the
right.
universe, right? It doesn't mean that we're 100%, of that. So
or maybe a soul,
who knows?
or maybe a soul decides to experience out a lot of things that it inflicted out. Let's say, for example, because in the past there was a lot of people that killed a lot of people. So how would you undo that, or how would you learn some of the lessons, if not for to have a really maybe a horrible lifetime where you're disabled or some kind of other thing that's not quote unquote normal, but that maybe the soul chooses to experience out some lesson that it has to learn, let's say.
So what exactly is the question? Why would we do
Yeah,
that?
I
Is that
guess
what you're
I
wondering?
guess do you think there's some value in there must be like before the birth takes place, the soul must have guides, so they must have, there must be a reason why they select a life as a cripple, or a life as a person that cannot hear or see.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I think the soul believes that there are reasons. Um, I personally am looking forward to getting past the point where I feel like I need to come back and learn those things, because as someone who believes that I have been here many, many, many hundreds of times, I have learned those lessons. It's time to move on and progress past this this recycling center for the soul, I guess, is the way that I see it. But that's just me personally. And yeah, I mean, I think what you were when you were speaking earlier, it kind of brought up for me the concept or the issue of karma. So some people would maybe believe that if I did X, Y, and Z in a particular lifetime, then that means that there's I owe something to somebody, or if I've done wrong, then that has to be balanced in the universe. And there are lots of people who for whom that is their belief system. I don't really see karma that way. Deepak Chopra, I actually like his interpretation of karma, which is basically that karma is just energetic patterns that kind of keep repeating themselves, and it's not necessarily a system of universal judgment, in terms of right or wrong or punishment, or who's virtuous and who isn't. It's more these patterns that we get into in believing that we want to experience certain things as a soul, or
Could be maybe just a lesson that you're stuck in this pattern, so you need maybe a different lesson.
right. Yeah, and so sometimes the soul will think, oh, I have this list of lessons that I want to learn, but it doesn't get those learnings. And so you were talking earlier about Theta Healing, and one of the aspects of Theta is to ask to be given those lessons or shown those lessons from the perspective of the creator of all that is, so that we don't need to keep repeating the same patterns of behavior over and over, that we can get those lessons and
Right.
and hopefully retain
How
them.
did you initially find Theta Healing?
So a friend of mine, someone who lives in the same city I do, in New Brunswick, Canada, She is someone I met through a friend. And I think the first time I met her, I went to her home for a meditation workshop. First time I had really done any kind of meditation. And so a month or two later, I saw the same person at a local holistic fair, and she was giving a free talk about Theta Healing. And it was something that she had just learned herself. And she was very passionate about it, and sort of did a little demonstration on how beliefs can be changed through this modality, and fairly quickly in a lot of cases. So as I was going through this sort of spiritual awakening period, and that modality really resonated with me, then I took a course in, I think it was May of 2013. Yeah. And it's something that was pretty far outside of my comfort zone at the time. And I was just kind of going with the flow.
Right.
And yeah, and it took me a while to even get used to using the modality on myself. And then I would use it with some clients. I was seeing people while I was doing hypnosis and NLP and timeline therapy, and it was something that I was a bit hesitant to share with other people because I thought it was just way too out there. I didn't think people would accept it. And it was interesting because that was a lot of my own belief system that I had to work through. And yeah, I mean, for the most part, I've had very few people who've actually said, that's really just not for me, I'm not interested. For the most part, people are pretty open-minded and are willing to give something a try. If they've been struggling for a while with something, then, they're open to, they might not necessarily have a great understanding of how it works. They just know that it makes them feel better, and they can see a difference, when we do the muscle testing sort of pre and post, they can see that a change has taken place.
Yeah, so aside from muscle testing, it's one of the rare modalities, I think. Body talk is the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that also uses muscle testing or muscle checking. But also what's unique about Theta Healing is that it requires some sort of belief in a higher power, in a God. So talk about that, why that is so.
Well, so theta, it's spelled Theta. So theta refers to the theta brainwave state. So, we have different brainwave patterns when we're at different levels of consciousness. When we're in a really deep sleep, our brainwave pattern looks different than mine and yours would right now as we're having this conversation, right? So theta or theta delta is considered to be a state of deep relaxation, and it's so the process or the modality is named after that state, where it's a deep state of learning. So hypnosis, people who are in a state of hypnosis or trance are also in that same brainwave pattern or brain length pattern. Yeah, so I wouldn't call myself an expert in terms of the history of Theta Healing and how it was developed. I will say that even the founder of the current version, her name is Vianna Steibel. She's a person who is a naturopath and a healer who is based in the Midwest of the United States. And yeah, so this is something that it's a modality that I think has ancient origins, and it shares some things with other types of healing methods that are out there. So in Theta, as you said, the person who is receiving the treatment or the healing, basically the only prerequisite is that they have a belief in something bigger than themselves. So,
Right.
God can be a fairly loaded term for some people. There are some, it can stir up a lot of emotions. So the term that I use is, well, either source energy or the creator of all that is. And, but other people have they prefer to use the term God. So it's really just whatever the client is comfortable
Right.
with. And so in Theta, the practitioner, when the healing actually takes place, it's entering into this theta brainwave pattern. or meditation, and making the request, it's called a command in Theta, of creator or source to enact a healing on this person. So it's either helping to clear negative beliefs from them, or showing them how and what it feels like to live their life in a certain way or without a certain emotion. If we've lived our lives with a lot of fear and anxiety and stress, we might not remember what it feels like to live without those things. So before we can clear the fear and the anxiety, the unconscious mind is going to be, if it doesn't know how and what it feels like to live without that fear and without the anxiety, it's going to be really reluctant to.
It's going to miss it, basically. And actually, it's going to miss the negative emotion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it's going to believe that it can't survive without it because it doesn't know how to. So I actually kind of pulled in Theta. I was talking about how I really just used it for myself and not other clients, but when I was practicing some timeline therapy with a few different people, I noticed that there are 5 different negative emotions that timeline therapy says are the ones to clear in a particular order. So it's anger, fear, hurt, sadness, and grief. And so these 2 people, they would clear the anger, no problem, sadness, no problem. But when we got to fear, these 2 different friends of mine, it was just this huge resistance, right? They just were not willing, their unconscious mind was not willing to let go of these old feelings of fear and anxiety. And then when I brought in the Theta, it was like this revelation, like, oh, of course you're not going to be willing to let something go if you don't know who you are without it, or you don't remember what it feels like to live without it. So that is one of the great things about Theta, is helping people, and it may not even be on a conscious level, but at an unconscious level, which is where the changes take place, showing them through creator or through source energy or God how and what it feels like to live their daily life without fear or without anxiety, showing them that it's safe to do that, because there's a reason for all behavior. Like, everything has a purpose. So if a person believes, I need to hold on to this old fear because it's going to keep me safe and protect me from future harm, then you have to show the unconscious mind that it is possible to be safe without it, and they're allowed to let it go, and that it's possible to let it go. Sometimes people have a belief that it's not possible to live their life in a certain way, or to live without a certain thing. So,
right. Yeah. So they need to be open, so they can. Basically, they want to have the want to change in some way, and that's why they usually come to you, because there's a certain suffering in their lives. There's something that's not going right, and that's when they usually. But this just me thinking for the people. That's when they would probably reach out to somebody that they never heard of, or the modality they never heard of, and be like, well, maybe I'll give this a go, because everything I'm doing is not working out, so maybe I'll try this, right?
Yeah. So on a conscious level, they definitely, as you said, they know that something's not working and they want to make a change. But where it gets tricky is if they don't have agreement from the unconscious side to let it go, because that's where the change really needs to take place. So, yeah, it's and
then
it's something that
how to get that is through the process of Theta Healing, to get the unconscious to agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, there are different modalities. I'm not somebody who necessarily thinks that there's a one-size-fits-all approach, and that any particular modality, including Theta Healing, is going to work equally well for everyone. I think it does work really well. There are also instances where, so I'll do muscle testing, or a lot of the work that I do is intuitive. So I'll just have a sense or a feeling, or I'll hear that, a certain person might benefit a little bit more from a modality that's a little more interactive, like timeline therapy, where you are actually asking the client to do some of the visualization and some of the work. But yeah, so.
Okay, talking about interactive, we talked about our cat So what happened was, do you want to demonstrate a little bit, and then I'll tell the backstory what happened with our cat. Okay,
Sure. Uh,
so let's
yeah, I
do a
mean, I
really
haven't
short
really done a
one.
reading. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically, we have two cats. So one of them is on my lap right now. Her name is Misha, and the other one, Ginger, is I don't know where she's at. Probably downstairs or outside. But we started to get an issue when this new one, the younger one, came, because the older one is like almost 10 years old, and the new one is like 6 months. And ever since Misha came about 2 or 3 months ago, the new cat has been out of sorts and grumpy, especially with me. I don't know about my grandparents, but maybe she's taken on a bigger resentment towards me or something. I know cats are very intuitive and stuff, and they can also see the change in behavior in me, I guess. So just for the sake of a short demonstration, I guess, what we can pick up.
You wanted to do some work on Ginger?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you mentioned the other day, well, a few things. When we talked the last time, you mentioned something about there were other people living in the home who aren't there now. And when I asked you about the cat's name, you said, well, you didn't really have a name for her, but your sister used to call her Ginger.
True.
And so right away, what I was hearing is that Ginger was feeling abandonment and a sense of grief, right? So for her, there's a lot going on. There's the issue of feeling displaced by this new cat and feeling, unwanted and unloved because the people who used to be around and used to care for her and have a relationship with her, that she feels is no longer there. So yeah, so she's dealing with multiple issues, I
Okay,
guess.
so she's feeling abandonment, not just what happened now, but also through the years as people moved out of the house, and she feels like there's really nobody been there other than my grandparents, basically. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense. So then, with Theta Healing, what when you have, let's say I guess through me, I guess Ginger is the client. So,
Right.
what do you do then to Ginger to quote unquote fix the problem or make it go
Mm-hmm.
away?
Yeah. So because you are, for all intents and purposes, her owner, you are acting on her behalf in terms of free will, because that's something what we talked about free
Mm-hmm.
will a while ago, but that's something that is very central to Theta. So, while I might be able to do a reading on someone, no changes or healings are done without the permission of that person. And it could be sometimes it's a little repetitive to keep asking the person over and over for permission to show them something or heal
Right.
something or have something removed. But when working with pets, we get the permission from the owner. So what I would do with Ginger is to ask Creator to clear. So she has some shock and some trauma. There's some cellular trauma there. Clear any frozen energy that might be going on for her. Resolve any unresolved issues. So really, we really want to show Ginger from the perspective of Source or Creator. Show her Creator's truth and perspective about the situation, about what's going on here, and show her and that happens for all of us, that
Hmm.
our mind, it gives meaning to things, or assigns meaning. It doesn't mean that it is the truth in terms of capital T source truth, or universal truth, but we kind of create our own meaning and our own truth. So a lot of times just having a download of truth from the perspective of Creator can really help things shift. So just to show her Creator's truth and perspective about about what's going on, about the people who've come and gone and the reasons why they've come and gone, and whether or not those reasons have anything to do with her, and just to kind of show her the role that others have played in her life and the role she's played in theirs. And then we want that truth to match her own.
Mm-hmm. And then do you
So,
go into like
yeah.
when you do theta healing, do you go into like a sort of a meditative state where your brain waves then go into a theta state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of the learning process of theta, and you don't have to take a course to learn theta. There are books out there that have been written by Vienna, and she explains how to get into that state, and she calls it going up to the seventh plane of existence. So theta refers to the multiple planes of existence. Right now we're on the third plane, but the creator of all that is that that energy resides on the seventh plane of existence. So she leads practitioners into how to get there. And so the first few times that you do it, it's sort of a multi-step process. But then when you're used to being in that state, now it's basically just setting an intention. So I know my unconscious mind knows that. Okay, now we're going to do some theta healing. So it's almost like being in that state instantly.
Okay, so you kind of like by repetition, you've kind of trained yourself to just be there right away. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting.
Yep. Hmm. So with Ginger, I talked a little bit about what we would show her, but then we would also want to show her creator's definition of forgiveness, because she's holding on to resentments right now.
Well, hold on.
Resentments
So
or something.
so even
Yeah.
even an animal is capable of holding on to resentments like that.
Sure. Why
Okay.
not? I mean, I'm not that I'm an expert on crows, but I've heard news articles or heard about research studies where crows they're realizing are highly intelligent, and they've actually done studies where I think it was on a university campus. They had people who were sort of not that nice to crows. Like they actually put a mask on the researcher, and they would have this person go out and just not that they were injuring the crows, but they were just like not very nice. And so then different people will go out wearing this mask, and then they realize that the crows recognize that person, and they were holding on to this. It wasn't like, oh, it's a new day, we'll give this person a fresh start. It was like, no, they were starting from the place of, this person's a jerk,
Right.
and you need to be on your guard and watch out for that person, right? So yeah, it's I think animals, we're realizing every day, and even plants are sentient beings. Like everything has an energy to it, and yeah, so we might not realize the level of awareness or consciousness that animals have, but they definitely have a consciousness.
So if plants also have a consciousness, then vegans also killing life. Then you're saying.
You said that, I didn't say that.
This reminds me, when I was in Scotland, I think there was a guy that told me that crows have a resentment for not just one generation, but several generations, he told me. And I was like, man, I think you're exaggerating. But
Now,
you,
now we're getting into epigenetics, and that's a fascinating topic of study. It's really interesting to see how trauma can get passed down from generation to generation through the
there we
genes.
go. It just seems like such almost like a Scottish thing to do, to hold on to something for generations. Anyway, okay, so
Now you're gonna get the Scots on
yeah,
your.
hey, I
tail.
love the
You gotta be
Scots. I lived
careful.
there many years. Um, but
So we're talking about animal consciousness and
right,
resentments
right.
and
So going going back to Ginger, is she's resenting basically that she's been not treated well, that she's not been treated well, and that people have come and gone, mostly gone in the past few years, and that she's been kind of alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you would clear that by asking. Well, you have also already the permission from the owner, me, and then you would with God's help, or with Source help, basically remove the emotional debris, as it were.
Yeah. And show her, the truth about why those people left and whether that actually had anything to do with her or not. And, so showing her how to, well, with resentments in particular, a lot of times it's around what we're trying to learn, the lessons we're trying to learn. And sometimes we think that we can't keep or hold on to those lessons or retain them unless we also hold on to the resentment. So it's a process of helping the person, or in this case, Ginger, understand, what is it that she was trying to learn through this experience, and showing her that it's possible for her to have those learnings and retain them without holding on to the resentments toward others. And then definitely showing her how and what it feels like to live without, the feelings of grief, feelings of abandonment, and yeah.
Would you be willing to do that now, or should we just continue on?
We can. I mean, I can. It's just it doesn't make for good
Okay,
podcasting
all right.
audio, I guess, because it's me basically closing my eyes and going into that theta state. And actually, this is a good segue though, because we haven't really talked about. We talked about the healing while being in the theta state, but I kind of referenced, making a command or a request of that energy, source energy or creator, to make a shift or a change. But so it's not the person as the practitioner, or me in this case. I'm not the one doing the
Right.
healing, right? I'm just a witness. So I am witnessing in my mind's eye the change happening, and that's what creates the healing. So again, I am not an expert in quantum physics, but it's about the observer effect. So for a change to happen, there has to be an observer. And so in theta healing, the practitioner is observing or witnessing the healing taking place in the mind's eye.
So, and the process you described for Ginger the cat would also be the same for any person. It's just that every step of the way, you'd ask the person for permission to integrate these changes. Correct?
Yes, exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
I was always wondering why, because there's a lot of alternative healing modalities, why they aren't so popular especially in industries where there's a lot of money, like professional sports and stuff like that. Is there a stigma against this? Because in my early days when I researched theta healing, I saw that it's possible theoretically to heal a bone in a day or within minutes, right? Because in professional sports, a lot of times what happens is somebody will break his leg or whatever, and this will be devastating because they'll be out for almost a year or more. So it's quite an important thing, and I don't understand why professional sports don't try anything more alternative, as it were.
That's a really good question. I think it would be a pretty big
Right?
leap from where they are now to, sort of widespread acceptance of an energy healing modality like theta healing. I think we're starting to see very small shifts. There's a whole industry of sports psychology, and you'll hear about, in particular, Olympic athletes talking about visualizing and using their mind, and sort of mentally rehearsing over and over and over the perfect performance, and that those are the people who do really well in their sport. I just think there's just not a widespread acceptance in the community for things like hypnosis, or if we can't, it's almost like there's a built-in bias in medicine and science that if it's not physically observable and measurable, it's hocus pocus, or it doesn't exist. But what's really interesting, I was just listening to something on CBC radio yesterday about hypnosis, and this person who, it really wasn't the focus. It was sort of a documentary series about just interesting short stories. And So this person who is a hypnotist, I think in Toronto, he was hired, and this is years ago, he was hired by Iraqi, I guess almost like they're either diplomats or secret service or something, to go and treat a patient in Iraq. And so this man who is the hypnotist, he didn't really follow current events. He didn't listen to the news. And so he knew nothing about like where he was going or the person he was treating. It ended up that he was treating one of the adult sons of Saddam Hussein. Uday Hussein. And he really didn't know much about this person until afterwards, right? He just thought, okay, this is my client. But what's interesting is Uday had some type of injury to his leg. I think it was like multiple gunshot wounds. And he had been treated medically for months, and his doctors said there was nothing medically wrong with his leg. But he
felt pain.
Couldn't put pressure on it.
He felt pain.
Yeah, like he felt pain. He couldn't function. So this man who is the hypnotist, he did hypnosis sessions for 10 days with, one-on-one with Uday Hussein. And by the end of the 10th day, the issue was resolved. He was walking normally, didn't have to use his cane or his crutch anymore. So, it's, like the power, there are things like instant healings. And you talked about reading about Theta, and that is actually sort of the origin or the genesis. This person, Vienna, she was really into healing work in terms of the physical body. And that there are lots of people out there who use Theta in that way. And there's a whole course called Intuitive Anatomy. So there are people who are medical intuitives, and they use these techniques to affect change and heal the body.
Right. It just, when you said that they judge things by what they can measure, I'm thinking if there would be just one example of like, let's say even a famous guy in sports, let's say for the sake of argument that LeBron James broke his leg, and that everybody would see that, obviously, and then if he went to a Theta healer, let's say, and that Theta healer restored the bone in one day, and then LeBron would be out, would be cleared to play, but the medical staff the next week and cleared to play again, I think people would start scratching their head and be like, what the hell is going on? And then, what would happen then is that other organizations around the NBA would start copying. It wouldn't just be NBA, it would be other. And so I think in a sense, all it takes is one example, a high profile example, and then other people are inevitably going to start to emulate that or try to emulate the same results,
Maybe. I think through the years, there have been lots of cases, not just with Theta healing, of spontaneous healing or spontaneous remission. And I remember a few years ago, now I can't remember the name of the author, but she was a medical doctor, and she actually wrote this whole book about spontaneous healing and the fact that, it's really hard even within her own profession to get people to recognize the legitimacy of those healings. So, we've probably seen or heard of different examples of people who've, cured themselves of cancer, or they've had tumors that have gone into remission. And there's not really a widespread acceptance of those. It's sort of like they're just treated as one-off anomalies. But things are changing, and I think things are shifting. And I think even just the fact that over the last several years, just conversations that I have with people I know, who, don't get me wrong, there are still lots of skeptics, but I just find more and more people are open and receptive to information about, what's out there beyond what we can sense with our traditional senses.
Right. I just think that a lot of people are very willing to say that if somebody has cancer and then it goes miraculously goes away, that somehow it was misdiagnosed. But it's a lot harder to do
Right.
with a bone that was broken, and then be like,
That's true.
oh, it was never broken. Come on, man. Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother level of skepticism to say it was never broken. Well, you actually saw the bone being broken. So anyway,
Right.
I also wanted to ask you about you mentioned the third plane of existence, and that there's seven
Yeah.
planes. I've had some guests say to me that we're changing dimensions. Is this the same thing, or is this something different?
It's something different. So in theta, so yeah, so going back to what you were talking about, so we're in this third dimensional reality. Some people, there's all this talk about moving to the fifth
Yes.
dimension. And I'm certainly not an expert in any of those. I just think that, yeah, I mean, I find it very interesting in terms of fifth dimensional living, and it's not necessarily a place where we will, like be transported to. It's more just reaching a state of consciousness where we're more expanded and open and we have different abilities maybe than we do in this third dimensional plane. So I understand it is a bit confusing to talk about the 3D or third
Right.
dimension versus the third plane of existence. So just to give you some examples in theta, the idea of the first plane of existence is things like rocks,
Okay.
like very basic, right? The second plane is the elements. So and included, like that's kind of nature and plants or trees. That's all part of the second plane of existence. That's where you would find elementals, which, and again, this is something that people may have strong feelings about, but
Like crystals or something?
being open to, well, crystals would be part of the first plane, but elementals meaning like fairies and gnomes and
Oh.
other sort of creatures or entities that are non-human but live or reside within the third plane, if that makes sense. So the third plane of existence are, that's kind of us, that's people. The fourth plane, that's where when people make a transition from this lifetime, they go to the fourth plane, and that's where a lot of the planning around, coming back and learning lessons and all of that
Do you
stuff that would
think
take
there's
place.
a heaven or hell? Or do you think because I'm a believer that Dante might have been right, and there's different levels of heaven or hell. Kind of like the inferno. Anyway, that's my theory.
Yeah,
That's my I don't know. Well, what do you think?
yeah. So I don't really believe in hell. I think that it is, there's hell on earth. Hell is what we create for
Sure.
ourselves in terms of our beliefs. Yeah, so in terms of heaven, I don't see it in terms of the version that's preached by Christianity and other religions. I just see them as other other planes of existence, other places we go. So the fourth plane is, like I said, it's kind of that way station where people, or where people make their transitions, so the souls kind of hang out there and decide, am I going to continue learning? Am I going to keep going back? And then there's the fifth plane of existence, which is kind of like, I guess if you want to use the term enlightenment, it's like, we don't have to keep coming back and
Right.
learning lessons. So on the fifth plane, that would be where your ascended masters hang out. It would be, angels. There could be other entities that people might think are not beneficial or not quote unquote good. They might hang out there as
Well,
well.
wait, on the fifth plane as well. Uh, that makes it confusing. So it means there's enlightened beings there, but also the beings that are kind of fallen angels, as it were, but it's still on the fifth plane. Oh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
okay.
So I don't know so much about enlightenment. And I think in terms of spirituality, that's what a lot of people are striving towards. But if you listen to Abraham Hicks, Abraham will talk, which is a collection of entities or beings, and they talk about there is no destination called enlightenment. It's basically being plugged into source energy, right? And that it's not like you're home free, like it's not like you get a badge saying I'm enlightened and then you're enlightened forever. It's being connected to all that is and being tuned into who you really are, and that is enlightenment. And that we can have that, here in our physical bodies. We, there's only so much of us that's here anyway, right? The greater part of us is elsewhere.
How is that so?
Right?
The greater part, meaning the soul.
Right.
So most of the soul is resting.
There's more of our energy outside of our body than inside of our body, right? Well, depending on your belief system.
Okay. And then the sixth plane is what?
The sixth plane is apparently, again, not an expert, and I don't speak for Vajana Stuyvesant.
It's okay. You can speak for yourself.
The sixth plane of existence are this is my understanding of it, it's the plane of universal laws. Mm-hmm. So the law of music, the law of mathematics, the law of attraction, whatever. It's sort of,
Okay, and the last one?
That is the plane of the creator of all that is. So the seventh plane is sort of like...
Oh, it's God. Okay, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I also want to touch upon something that I think you prescribed to me a few times, which is a spiritual practice called Ho'oponopono, I think it is. It's a Hawaiian practice, right?
Yep. It's called Ho'oponopono. So pono in the Hawaiian language means to make right. So ponopono is to really make it right. So Ho'oponopono is something that's actually an ancient Hawaiian practice and tradition, and it's been modernized over the years. So in the past, it used to be something that was practiced by the kahunas, which would be kind of like priests of the Huna religion or system of spirituality. And it was used mostly almost like a kind of mediation between families, either within a family or between different families. It was a practice it was kind of like reconciliation or mediation. And then in the last century anyway, there's been a sort of a modernization of Ho'oponopono in shifting it from something that was performed externally by kahunas and something that could be performed by individuals. And what's really interesting about the more modern versions of Ho'oponopono is going back to this idea of us creating our own reality.
Right.
And so the person who sees something in their world, whether or not they think it's external to them, the idea is, well, somehow I've created this reality, so I am taking responsibility for shifting it. And so there are, different versions or different prayers that can be used, but the one that's kind of most popular today it's almost like a short meditation. It's just repeating 4 phrases over and over, and there's not really a set way or method of saying them, but it as long as they're all included, it kind of works. So it's I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. I think I usually start with I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. So you're really speaking to the divine within. So it's basically asking for a self-healing, right? So whatever it is that you're seeing in your environment, whether it's in you personally, whether it's in a relationship you're having with another person, you are saying to the divine, I'm sorry that I've created this situation. Please forgive me, and then showing gratitude. Thank you. I love you. And yeah, there's some really interesting benefits that can come from that. And what's really great about it is you don't need any special training. It's, you know, it's free. Anybody can do it. It's yeah, it's something that it's it can bring a lot of peace.
It's a free method.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that is easy to learn and anybody can do it. So you don't need a mediator, which is really something that's amazing, right? So a lot of these techniques that I was talking about, you know, modalities that I practice, those are things that, you know, I've made investments in training, and I've learned different techniques, and I've kind of apply them to other people and to myself. But the beauty of Ho'oponopono is that it's anybody can do it. And they are just like with Theta, you are the healer, you know, you and through source energy, you're performing the healing. But unless you've done the training yourself or read about it, you're kind of relying on a third party to help mediate that process. But with Ho'oponopono, you are in the driver's seat.
Talk about because you mentioned hypnosis before. Talk about how would you compare Theta Healing to hypnosis? Because it seems in some way that they're similar. Because you work on belief systems, you work on subconscious things, and this is something that hypnosis deals with. And it seems like Theta Healing can access somebody's subconsciousness without the hypnosis part. So in a way, it may be faster.
Which part? The Theta?
Yeah, compared to Theta Healing to hypnosis.
Well, I definitely think it's faster than hypnosis. And what I think for me, they're very similar. But in addition to being more efficient or quicker, with hypnosis, you are relying on a hypnotist to work with your unconscious mind and provide direction, to provide, you know, the instructions on the change to be made. Whereas in Theta, you're making a request or a command of a universal source energy to, yeah. So I guess if I were to compare the two, you know, hypnosis is limited to the skills of the hypnotist, right. And Theta is really it's drawing on universal energies. So it's similar, but really different.
But wouldn't also the Theta Healer, the skills of the Theta Healer come into play somewhat?
They definitely do. But again, I feel like in Theta, the practitioner is more like, they're more like a radio receiver. They're receiving information because it is intuitive, and Theta really opens up people's intuitive abilities, their psychic abilities. So the Theta healer has to be an open channel and has to be clear and has to make sure that their own stuff isn't interfering with that process. But it's kind of like channeling energy. And whereas in hypnosis, it's completely different. You're relying 100% on the skill and the, I guess, the creativity of the hypnotist in terms of the set of instructions that they're going to be giving.
Yes, it's and I remember when we did the courses, we get the text, and but after a while, you were expected kind of to work without the text and just kind of do it freestyle. And I always find that to be very interesting because you can go into many different directions, and that's where you kind of see how somebody with a lot of practice can become better and better. Obviously, usually the more practice you get in something, the better you get. Unless your training was bad from the get-go, then right.
True, but it's interesting. Even though I don't use hypnosis regularly anymore, there are still lots of techniques we learned from Georgina that I do use, and I find that some of those techniques are really helpful for acquainting people with their own unconscious mind, because for a lot of people who are coming in, it's completely they're completely unaware of their broader self and unaware of who they are at an unconscious level. So one thing, I don't know if you were in one of the courses, you must have been, because I think we were all in both the same courses together, but this technique where she, taught us how to have clients imagine jars on a shelf, and they have labels on them with different negative emotions, right? I use that all the time with people, and it's really amazing for them. It's almost like a little warm-up activity I'll do with them. I introduce it as getting, having them get to know their unconscious mind a little bit, and they're really amazed at how much negative emotion they're holding on to.
Can you just walk me through it, and we'll just do a short demonstration? I think I know what you mean, but I'm not quite 100% sure.
Sure. So I'll just kind of walk you through it as though I were walking a client through it. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to imagine a row of shelves on a wall. It could be in the room you're sitting in. It could be a wall in your mind's eye.
And I have my eyes closed?
And it's probably easier to do it with your eyes closed, sure. So if you want to get into that state right now, and maybe just take a deep breath and let that go, and take another deep breath and relax. Good. So I want you to find that wall and imagine there are rows of shelves on that wall. And the shelves contain glass jars. They can be any shape or size, but you should be able to see into the jar. And each jar has a label on it of a different negative emotion. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to tune into your unconscious mind and to get a sense of how full each of those jars are. And so we're going to be asking your unconscious mind to rate the level of different negative emotions that you are holding on to in your body or in your energy field. And it's not necessarily how you feel today, but we want your unconscious mind to give us a rating of, over the course of your lifetime, how much unresolved emotion are you holding on to? And the jar is a way for us to gauge that level of emotion. So I'm going to ask you to rate on a scale of 1 to 100 how full those jars are. So for some people, they might see a number on a board, like a whiteboard or a chalkboard. Some people might hear a number in their head. Some people might see the jar and kind of eyeball it and say, well, it looks like it's 50% full, or maybe it's overflowing. Maybe you have 2 jars and they're both full. So it's not about trying to determine on a conscious level, but it's just getting out of the way and allowing that information to float up from the unconscious level. So are you ready to give that a try?
Sure, let's go.
Okay, good. So just taking another deep breath. That's right. So I want you to find the jar marked anger and tell me, on a scale of 1 to 100, how full is that jar?
40-something%, 45.
Good. So the jar marked sadness, how full is that jar?
63.
Okay, good. And just remember, your unconscious mind knows exactly how full these jars are. So you can just relax and let go and just let that information float right into your conscious awareness. So next, I want you to find the jar marked frustration or frustrated and tell me, how full is that jar?
It appears to be quite full. See my analytical mind right now, because I'm aware that we're on the show. So anyway,
that's okay. That's a quick example.
Let's end it there.
So, that's okay. I wasn't really going to cover too many more, but so on that list, Georgina had given us a list, and I think I've added a few more, and it's just really interesting to see. And then I would end off by asking the person, are there any jars that, if they look around, are there any other jars they notice whose names I didn't mention? And it's just kind of an opportunity for them to fill in some blanks.
It's a really good technique to because I used to do this, and I used to do a thing called the twirl, which was my favorite, which was a kind of you get if I remember correctly, it was like it was locating where the pain or the anger or the feeling, let's say frustration, like locating it on the body,
Yeah.
and then
Yep.
making it a twirl, like making it a solid twirl that goes out of the body, and then adding some joy and happiness in it, and then putting it back in. I remember doing that with some of my coworkers in my security job.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was fun. That was fun. People usually experience some good things. Um, yeah, I do think Theta Healing and Hypnosis, they have similarities, but they're very different. And my point of view is very pragmatic. Whatever works, whatever yields results, that certainly can be used and is beneficial, unless it hurts other people or it
For
has
sure.
some other unforeseen negative consequences. But this doesn't seem to, so very good. Um, so if people, what kind of sessions do you do if people want to reach out to you?
Well, I do in-person sessions, but I also do sessions over Zoom or over the phone, either one. It's really interesting. I find even just over a non-video call, it's almost like, it sounds funny, but it's easier to get to a deeper level because you're not conscious of looking at
Right.
yourself on a video. You're just kind of there with the person. Your energies are there, but
Well,
it's
we used
really
to do
interesting.
it because I used to live in a hostel, so wouldn't want to be on audio even. So we used to do it on just over text chat, like on Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're the only person I've ever done that with, and it does work. It just takes
Yes,
a
to
little
type it
longer,
out.
especially if you're not quick on the
Yes.
typing. Yeah. But no, it's I love working with all kinds of people, and working with them virtually and at a distance, and that is one thing that I do like about theta as opposed to hypnosis. It's a lot easier to do it because the person is consciously aware, right? They're awake when you're working in theta. So I think I only did a hypnosis remote session once, and it was quite a long time ago, and back when Skype was really not a stable platform necessarily and crashed a lot. And so I had this person in a state, trance like state, and then we
Oh
lost
my
our
gosh.
connection. So yeah, it wasn't, I'm not a fan of doing hypnosis
Right.
remotely, but
But I think during the
yeah,
COVID time, a lot of people nowadays, the connections are better. They are doing
yes,
it, and they're finding
yes.
quite probably good results because also there's no other way. A lot of yeah. So they still have to do
Yeah, no,
mental
it's,
work, like to relieve the suffering
yep.
of people, especially now that they're. Yeah, what advice would you have on people that? Because some countries are in severe lockdowns. So, like for example, here in Slovenia, even if you go outside, you're supposed to wear a mask. Now, often when I go to the
Right.
store, because it's so close and it's night, I don't put on a mask until I go inside the store, because that's when they really want it. But so yeah, what can people do in this time when it's well, severe restrictions in some countries?
Yeah, I would say that it's just like not necessarily from a theta point of view, but just from a mental health point of view, just important to relax in terms of doing some meditation, maybe listening to some guided meditations on YouTube, or there are all kinds of hypnosis sessions on YouTube as well. I think because we are in a state, generally there can be some fear and some anxiety and frustration. There's a lot of frustration in people who, we talked about your cat grieving. Well, there are people who are grieving the loss of their livelihoods and the loss of life as they knew it before COVID. So I think it's really important for us to take some time to just clear our minds and sort of connect with who we are and meditate and also to kind of unplug from the collective consciousness around COVID and, to maybe not listen obsessively to reports on
Right.
the radio or TV. I know it's hard to get away from that. And I would say that, I definitely am sort of keeping up with the news now as well. But if I'm feeling stressed, then sort of taking a break from that, I think, is important. It's important to be informed, but I think it's maybe not necessary to sort of hang on that information on a daily basis, if that makes sense.
So, where can people find you if they want a session with you or anything like that?
Well, I have a website. It's www.innerwisdomwellness.ca. I picked that name for a very particular reason because I think we all have, the wisdom within to we all have our own information inside of us, what we need. But it's a very long, it makes for a long email address and a long website. I have an email address is Karen at Karen at innerwisdomwellness.ca.
I'll put
And
those two, the email and the website underneath the YouTube video or the podcasting, wherever the people watch it. I'll put it under so people can contact you.
Oh, that's great. For sure. Yeah, that would be awesome. My website it's a little older and it doesn't really have a lot of information on there about Theta because when I created it, I was in that mindset that Theta is a little too woo-woo and people might not be ready for that, but I definitely do. That is what the bulk of my
Right.
work
I
is
think
Theta.
now in 2020 people are ready for even more than Theta, so it's okay.
I think you're right. Yeah, it's time to update my
Yes.
website.
Well, Karen, it's
Yeah.
been a pleasure having you on the podcast. So thank you very much for being on.
Why, thank you so much. That was a great experience. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for listening to the podcast.